Now I have a list down here also of the most common Kyphi recipes that they found in temples, and the ones that the Greeks captured and brought back were, as I mentioned, full of what would have been for the Egyptians very exotic fare that came into them. They purchased, brought in, imported, which increased the value of it, and also for them made it feel more exotic in their temples. And some of those earlier recipes had in them, let me just check my list here, myrrh, frankincense, cinnamon, cassia, galbanum, and especially imported trees, cedar and balsam, and the resin from them, because those things were not available in Egypt. They might not seem so exotic to us. This ingredient of cedar might not seem so exotic to us, but to the ancient Egyptians it was extremely exotic and an import. Now, early recipes for the temple recipes did have more local ingredients that were in them, but it seems to become more and more exotic as time went by. And by the time it got to the temples of Ra, it was this very involved, very expensive incense that was full of these imported ingredients. And there are versions of the Kyphi historically and even more recently that have ingredients that even in our modern times we would consider to be exotic. Things like saffron. I think when I was making this, early on when I was making this, we had saffron in it. In all honesty, it's not in my current recipe because I couldn't afford to put saffron in it. We all have to make some decisions. But however, my current recipe doesn't call for saffron, so I am a little bit spared there and don't have to worry about it. But the early recipes probably were recipes that included just what was local. They were either boiled in honey or steeped in wine. Sometimes they were pulverized and then wine added. But one thing they all had in common, which is why there is this wonderful process I'm going to take you through for making Kyphi. And that is that I just put my dates and my raisins together in my jug. Always use a wooden utensil. No metal for this when it comes to stirring it once it's in the container. I always thought that if I had one of those ceramic knives, I would use that rather than use a metal knife, just to stay away from the metal. But I don't have one of them, so I always use my regular cooking knife. When you're stirring though, once you start making the ingredient in the mixtures, I'd suggest you use a wooden spoon. So what was I talking about? I got so carried away by my mixing, I kind of forgot what I was talking about. These ancient recipes, it's important that they had something from the local land in them too. And you're going to see as we put this together that we will honor local, in addition to what's exotic and that we import for us as part of this process. Let me look at my notes and see if there's anything else I want to let you know about historically about Kyphi and where it came from. Checking my notes is a good thing. It reminded me where I was when I distracted myself. The one thing all recipes for Kyphi, ancient and current, have in common is it's a meditative process. Every step of the way, as we add ingredients, after we make our base, the ingredients are put in for a specific reason, and there's meditations around each ingredient. And as we add the ingredients day by day, we come to this place of using it as an active meditation. And it is a beautiful process to follow. And when we do that, we have in common with, no matter the simplicity of the very early recipes or the more exotic temple recipes, or any of the versions that the Greeks then took from there, or any of the many ones we will find from then, even including ones we find on the internet nowadays that people are making. I checked YouTube and didn't find, I don't think I found any videos on this, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to do it. In addition to the fact that a couple of my viewers knew we were going to do this and actually bought their supplies and they're making it too. What was important is following the process that the priests, now we know definitely the priests to Ra because we have those historical records, that every day a new spice was added to the dry mix that will be added in the end to our wet mix. And every day there were certain rituals and prayers and chants that were done. Every step of the process was a spiritual, meditative process. We could do that with any incense that we make. Any of our simple incenses, even if we're using our household spices, if we intentionally add one every day, and meditate on the reason why that's going in and what that particular spice means, we've arrived at the same kind of thing. This is a particularly long process. We're going to be adding, in the end, 13 ingredients, which is 13 days of meditation. They are added in a specific way, and they each have a specific meaning. Both what they mean in the Kyphi, and then of course what we know, what we've come to know them as. That's what all of these recipes have in common. Most of the old ingredients, after it got past simple local incense and became temple incense, have raisins, dates, and honey involved. And all of them followed a process that was spiritual in the way all of the bits and pieces were added together. So, what I find it useful for, beyond the fact that you will never, I guarantee you, smell anything like this. It will take you away. Just the smelling of it takes you to places you've never been. But I have a little small list here of the reasons why I have always used it. A lot of them have something in common with those ancient Egyptian beliefs and what it did. You get a sense of timelessness when you burn this. Especially if you're the one that made it. Whether you made it in a group, some groups get together and make this as a process together. Or whether you've made it alone. It's a sense of timelessness because it's an ancient technique, this putting together of these ingredients and praying or meditating over each one and really understanding the symbolism of each one before then adding the next one. A sense of timelessness. It does indeed chase away the troubles of the day. There's a feeling of release. It's like an exhale. When you breathe Kyphi, it's like, oh, it just does that to you. Who knows what part of the brain it reaches, but it does that to almost everybody who smells it. Definitely promotes good sleep and also promotes dreams. Beautiful, beautiful dreams. Absolutely. And when you think of what Plutarch told us about 3 incenses used for morning, noon, and night, when we think of that in the meditations around this, think of where it might have fit into the flow of the day. Kyphi is an incense only of the night. We use it at no other time. Only of the night, and not twilight or dusk, but the dark of night, when the sun truly has gone down. It honors the fact that there is that rising and peaking to the day, and then the time of repose. Very, very much the energy of that time of day, the time of repose, that kind of peace, that tranquility that comes at the end of the day. One other thing that it was seen to do in ancient times, which I have found it to be very powerful in, is in eliminating sorrow. I have turned to batches of Kyphi when I have lost friends and loved ones. I have given it as a gift to help others when they have lost loved ones. It is, it works. It allows you to grieve without going into that place that you lose track of all the beauty and the wonder about your love and your remembered love for the person you've lost. Very powerful in, it doesn't get rid of sorrow, but it makes sorrow be an experience that you're more in tune with, and not that wailing grief, but something that really does have the mixture of remembrance and love and gentleness, and oof, it's really good at that. So even as a modern practitioner, the magical powers I have found of it are very much aligned with what the ancients said about it. So I have dates and raisins, and I'm going to do a separate video right after this, which is nothing more than the purchasing of the ingredients and what you need to make the mix. Well, what I have in here is 50 raisins, which I have multiplied out to make an increased ratio for this. The basic recipe would be 50 raisins and a cup of the finely chopped figs. Figs and dates both work. I like the figs better. There is a ratio about how many figs and dates to use one against the other, which might help you. And you might like this. It's 4 raisins for every tablespoon of dried ingredients that you're going to mix together. So I'll put this all on the video that explains the ingredients. I think you'll enjoy the video on the ingredients. It won't be too long of a video, but I think it's very interesting. As a modern practitioner, the first is getting a hold of some of these ingredients. They are expensive, and also honoring that some of them are now coming from endangered species, and we might think twice about using them or using a replacement for them. So I do think you will enjoy. If you're serious about incense and serious about the world we live in, you might find it interesting what we might have to consider in the way of endangered species, making some of these ancient recipes. So in here we have the daisins. That's what happens when you mix raisins and dates or figs. You get daisins, raisins and figs. I'm going to add lotus oil. Now, a couple of you did ask me, lotus oil is not particularly cheap, and you'd ask me if there's any substitutes for it. The only substitute I could really recommend for it is ylang ylang, and that's also not particularly cheap. The good news is you don't need to use a lot. I'm actually putting quite a bit in here because I moved that recipe up pretty strong by adding probably 3 times the raisins and figs as the basic would be. So the recipe I'm going to share will actually say how many drops of that to do. And I'm also going to add, if you're looking at recipes online, you're going to see that later on, at the end of the mixing cycle, honey is added to the wet mixture. And I add honey to the wet mixture early on, a little bit, not a lot. Most of it's going to get added at the end, and the reason I do that is, everybody talked about the importance of there being things that are local, that are added in. Look for an organic honey from your area that will then have the essences of the wildflowers. It should be a wildflower-based honey that's from your area. It actually, a little bit more than that. It actually brings then in some of the power of the local, because a lot of these ingredients we're going to put in here did not come from anywhere near where I live, that's for sure. So I added the lotus oil, and you could use ylang ylang for that instead, and the honey. And then you're going to take, which I have somewhere behind me, the deepest red wine you can get cheap. If you're like me, this is so cheap. Look, boys and girls, it has a screw top on it. This is a very cheap South African Merlot. Port works really, really good too. Any of the deep, deep red. And you're going to put in just enough to cover. We're seeping this in the wine, so we just want it long enough to cover it. And yes, I know that some of my young friends are going to be asking me, what do you do if you're young and alcohol's a no-no? First thing is check and find out if you're living at home if your parents would mind if you use it as a recipe and put it in. The other thing is, I have a young friend who makes Kyphi, and he uses grape juice. Nothing with additives, nothing with any extra sugar, real, true grape juice, which you can get organically. That is nothing but the grape. And it seems to work out. I know when I smell it, it doesn't smell, it smells like mine. So I don't find too many young people making this for the simple, need more in there, simple fact that the ingredients are expensive. They really are. You can certainly look for substitutes from your correspondences and try making other versions of it. Or you just might want to focus on making raisin, fig, honey-based incenses and try adding some other things to them. It does need to be resin-centered to be something that's a true Kyphi. Even if we have all these different recipes for Kyphi, what we do have amongst all of them, though, is they're very heavy resin-centered. So, covered with the wine into an airtight container. This has a rubber seal on it, it's an airtight container. Stirred a couple of times a day throughout the entire process. We're making this batch, putting the dry ingredients together. This gets stirred. I always stir it in the morning at breakfast time and then at night before I go to bed to amalgamate the ingredients that are in it, and also they're going to absorb the wine, so you want to add wine as you need to keep it just even with a little bit over the top of your ingredients. There is the start of making a batch of Kyphi. And I'm going to do another video to give you the ingredients. And what I plan on doing is every night that I prepare the next ingredient, I'm going to be taking you through that so that you can share with me the power of the ingredient, the meditations around it. These aren't specific meditations, these are pondering what the ingredient might mean. Every time I make Kyphi, the different ingredients have different things that stand out to me as what they mean to me personally more that time than other times. It's an amazing journey, this making of the Kyphi, and I hope that you will enjoy coming along with me. If you plan on making it, you can certainly look at these later and make it along with me, or if you are just interested in a journey through history and the experience of making Kyphi and seeing what it is like. I wish you all mirth and reverence. Merry part.